an employee in the world's greatest park, discovers something terrible underfoot.
He feels a crack underneath his boot. It turns out to be bone.
What the park worker discovers would unearth a mystery that would make headlines around the world.
Underneath leaves and a woman's fur coat, police find the skeletal remains of 2 young children. Whoever did this hid their bodies several years earlier.
Once the media gets a hold of the story, the 2 children become known as the Babes in the Woods, a mystery that remains unsolved for 70 years.
It becomes the most notorious double murder in Vancouver's history. A mother suspected of murdering her own children, but police don't know who they are.
A maverick cop takes matters into his own hands, and with new breakthroughs in technology, might solve what many think is an unsolvable case. Can the Babes in the Woods be given justice after decades of searching?
The unsolved ones, we have to stand up
and approach these cases in a way outside the box.
Let the world know, is those out there that did commit a murder, there are people that are coming after you.
There's just a lot of good people trying to do the right thing.
Because it's something that you have to be passionate about.
Solve this, bring some peace to the family at least. Just doing my job.
In 1953, Vancouver's Stanley Park overlooks the Pacific Ocean to one side and a growing metropolis to the other. Park employee Albert Tong walks through the woods in Stanley Park to clear the area and reduce the risk of a forest fire.
As he's walking through the area, the park worker feels a crunch underneath his boot. When he inspects further, he discovers a woman's fur coat.
When Albert Tong lifts the fur coat, he reveals a hidden crime scene. The crunch underfoot was from a small skull hidden under the ground and wrapped in the coat.
The fur coat is covering the skeletal remains of 2 small bodies. With tree roots growing over the remains and the state of decomposition the bodies are in, Tong would know he's come across a shallow grave that has been there for some time.
The location is close to an old fish hatchery and a trail to a bridge, but the heavily wooded area would conceal anyone's activities.
This could have been a case where 2 children were lost and exposed to the elements, then wrapped themselves up in a fur coat for warmth. But it doesn't take long for police to rule that theory out.
When detectives arrive on the scene, they discover a trove of physical evidence.
The bodies are positioned head to foot. From appearances, they are 2 children, one slightly larger than the other. The smaller skeleton lies face down, while the other larger one lies with its head and shoulders on top of the feet of the smaller one.
An Air Force flying helmet is still on one of the skulls, but each skull shows signs of injury.
Police believe the murder weapon has been left at the scene, a small lathing hatchet, broken at the handle. This type of hatchet is small, light, and cheap. It has a hammer end for driving nails and a thin blade for chopping, typically used for lath and plaster walls or roof framing, or by campers. The hatchet is easy to carry.
In the 1940s and 50s, it would be fairly common for someone to be seen carrying a hatchet in Stanley Park. It wouldn't be unusual for someone to chop up some firewood for camping, or for home heating if they lived close to the park.
There are light wounds on the skulls of each child, indicating blows from the hatchet, but they are not struck with a lot of force.
The light wounds suggest that whoever struck with the axe did not have a lot of strength. 1950s thinking leads them to believe that a woman possessed the hatchet. The bodies were also covered in a woman's fur coat.
The fur coat is deteriorated, but it's a short coat and size 16, indicating the wearer was stocky. It was made locally from rabbit and mutton. Vancouver's Stanley Park, voted the greatest park in the world, the 1,000-acre park covers the northwest half of Vancouver's downtown peninsula, while skyscrapers and bridges begin to fill the skyline to the south.
Although Vancouver has its share of crime, generally in the 1950s, people feel like it's safe for kids to play outside in the sprawling parks.
The jewel of Stanley Park is Beaver Lake, where Indigenous peoples have gathered since time immemorial. The park worker makes his discovery in a wooded area nearby. The park is home to 500,000 trees, many of them more than a century old. The Vancouver news media show up to report on the grisly discovery, and soon newspapers around the world tell the story of 2 children who have been found in this shallow grave, nicknaming them the Babes in the Woods.
Using the tattered clothing and shoes at the scene, police determine the bodies are a boy and a girl. The girl is approximately 8 years old and the boy 6 or 7. Because they appear to have the same prominent jawbone, police predict them to be siblings.
Stanley Park, in the heart of Vancouver, 2 innocent lives were lost. Who would do such a thing?
Beneath the shoulder of one of the children, police recover a woman's shoe, size 5.5.
Police believe that in a panic, the woman may have run away from the scene of the crime and left her shoe lodged beneath one of the bodies.
Combined with a coat that is smaller and made from rabbit fur, police believe they are looking for a smaller woman of modest means as the suspect, possibly the children's mother.
Given the amount of foliage in the gravesite, police estimate the murders to have taken place years earlier.
With the help of the media, police try linking missing persons cases with the murder scene. At the same time, they've collected statements from anyone who may have witnessed suspicious activity involving a woman at Stanley Park in 1947.
Given the fact that the woman may have left her shoe beneath the body of one of the children, police believe she may have panicked and run away from the scene. They speculate she threw herself into Burrard Inlet after she committed the murders.
For Vancouver in the middle of the 20th century, a mother driven to these desperate lengths could be simply a sign of the times. After the Second World War, the influx of male workers to Vancouver from the east, as well as returning soldiers from the war, made it nearly impossible for women to hold on to the jobs that they had during the war years. Single mothers were then left with low-wage jobs, such as retail or domestic service, that required long hours. With no access to childcare resources, widows and single mothers would inevitably be driven further into poverty.
If you're a single mother in the late 40s and your only source of income gets taken away, things could become very desperate.
In 1948, there were 7 murders in Vancouver, and 3 involved mothers and children.
One case is reported where a mother throws her children off a bridge. In another, a mother locks herself and her child in a gas-filled room.
Police conclude they're looking at another case where a mother or female guardian believes they've run out of options to care for their children.
The mothers who were driven to kill their children experienced extreme socioeconomic disadvantages and possible mental health complications, such as psychosis or depression. And at the time, there was an absence of preventative social services to protect these children and get these mothers help. While tips begin to flood into Vancouver's police department, experts try to use modern police methods to reconstruct the victims.
The idea here is to try and humanize the evidence as much as they can. There isn't a lot of technology at the disposal of law enforcement, so they try to give their victims a face, rebuild their wardrobes, and hope it gives them some clues.
The clothing worn by the children is reconstructed in a laboratory, using only the scraps that remained on their bodies.
The girl's clothing has deteriorated almost completely. They note that she wears underwear so big, it needs to be taken in by a safety pin at the back. The boy is confirmed to be wearing a Canadian-made red tartan jacket. He also wears beige corduroy trousers and scamper shoes.
Police believe that the children's shoes offer them a piece of information. They are the same type of rubber-soled shoe, but different sizes. And that type of shoe only became available in 1947. So they believe they can narrow down the date of the murders to about 1947 or 1948.
While investigators piece together the skeletons of the two children, an anthropologist is brought in from Austria. Erna von Beersdorf specializes in sculpting unidentified victims.
She makes busts of what the two young victims could look like if they were alive. The two busts would be photographed, and the pictures placed in newspapers to try and identify the victims.
Medical examiners find holes in the skulls. They are consistent with the wounds caused by the hatchet police discover at the scene.
The hatchet, commonly used by shingle weavers and lathers, was likely used to strike the boys over the head.
There are 3 cleft marks that fit the thin blade of the hatchet, while fracture wounds could have been caused by the hammer end of the hatchet.
The sculptor says the two children look very similar, possibly with blonde hair, and are Swedish or Norwegian. The Babes in the Woods case becomes very famous very quickly. A $500 reward is offered for information. Police circulate pictures, looking for a break in the case.
Tips begin to flood into law enforcement. As the number of leads increase, police must search through many eyewitness accounts from years before to try and identify their victims.
In 1953, no one is aware that the search would last almost 70 years. In the heart of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, famed Stanley Park is one of the great parks of the world. But in 1953, shockwaves are sent through Vancouver and beyond when a park employee discovers the skeletons of two children buried in a shallow grave covered in a woman's fur coat. Dubbed the Babes in the Woods by newspaper reporters, police believe the two children, a boy and a girl aged 7 and 8, were killed by their mother years earlier and buried in a shallow grave. Police scour through hundreds of tips, trying to identify the woman who left her shoe and a fur coat behind with her children.
Because of the mental state detectives believe the woman was in, they wonder if she may have run away from the scene of the murder to the nearby Lionsgate Bridge and jumped off.
Police are looking for reports of a woman wearing a fur coat, accompanied by two children in Stanley Park, sometime in the winter months of 1947.
There are no shortages of eyewitness accounts to sort through. A woman is found dead in a gas-filled room later in 1953. Prior to her suicide, her two children haven't been seen for months.
While the children closely fit the description of the Babes in the Woods, the case reaches a dead end.
In 1950, a woman and her two children rent a small boat from nearby Kitsilano Beach, never to return. Her body is later found in Burrard Inlet, but the children in the boat are never found.
Police can find no evidence that this is connected to their Babes in the Woods case.
A young boy befriends two children who seem to vanish afterward. When the boy asks their mother what happened to them, she brushes them off without answering. Police visit a hotel where they believe a guest could be George Pfeffel, who is wanted for the abduction of his own children in New Jersey.
After divorcing his wife, George Pafal gets permission to take his 2 young boys to the park. They're never seen again.
But the man isn't Pafal, and the children in question are both boys. A biology teacher says he was collecting specimens for his class when he saw 2 young children and a woman walking along the Stanley Park seawall. One child banged a hatchet against the metal railing. Later that day, the teacher sees a woman looking distraught, sitting on a bench overlooking Beaver Lake.
She has blood on her ankle, wears only 1 shoe, and has no coat. When the man asks her what happened, she replies, she fell in a ditch.
But the teacher's visit takes place in 1951, which doesn't fit the timeline. A local woman gives police a recollection that seems very close to what they're looking for.
The witness recounts she was in the park on October 5, 1947, and had written in her diary that she had seen a woman wearing a fur coat with 2 children walking towards the bushes. The woman is carrying a hatchet, presumably to chop some wood. This isn't unusual in the 1940s and 50s.
As the eyewitness leaves the park, 45 minutes later, she sees the same woman alone walking out of the bush, this time with no coat and 1 shoe.
The witness takes the police to where she saw the woman with the shoe. She leads them to within 50 yards of where the children's bodies were found.
Detectives lock in on the date, October 5th, 1947. At the same time, newspaper reports prompt members of the public and other police forces to send missing persons cases to Vancouver that may fit the description of the babes in the woods. In all, police investigate 41 pairs of missing children.
A lot of investigation time is spent tracking down all of the allegedly missing children. While none of them turn out to be the children found in Stanley Park, police do locate 26 of the 41 missing pairs of kids, some as far away as South America, Scotland, and the United States. At this point, Vancouver police are working with other police forces across Canada on this case. They're searching school records, social agencies, and tips.
Months of investigation turn into years, but by 1960, all the leads dry up.
Police have located 76 pairs of children reported missing in Western Canada. They still can't connect any missing persons to the babes in the woods.
1 missing pair of children can't be located. Their mother, Madeleine Fortier, lives in a small town in Quebec.
Madeleine Fortier was in Vancouver around 1947. She had a boy and girl who matched the approximate ages of the babes in the woods. Fortier told authorities they were given up for adoption.
But police aren't allowed to travel to Quebec to investigate the lead. Police don't believe the case will ever be solved. But just in case, they keep the skeletons of the 2 young children found in Stanley Park.
At the time, police don't know what they may need to use as evidence. The bones and other items recovered at the scene are placed in 3 file boxes. Then they are placed in the basement of Vancouver's Coroner's Court.
And it's here where the children would stay for 25 years, until a rogue cop takes matters into his own hands, and the course of the case finally changes. The crime scene in Vancouver's Stanley Park makes headlines around the world. Police are desperate to determine who the children are, wrapped in a fur coat, believed to belong to their mother. After years of investigation, the children remain unidentified.
The Babes in the Woods case is never forgotten. In the 1980s, a Crime Stopper recreation is made asking for tips. Police always believed the answer is somewhere out there.
For decades, the remains of the children sit in evidence boxes, locked in a basement, while the police museum offers a recreation of the crime scene for all to see.
The Babes in the Woods case becomes the most notorious unsolved murder in Vancouver's history.
But in 1997, a Vancouver detective takes evidence without permission and alters the direction of the Babes in the Woods case. Without telling his supervisors, Detective Sergeant Brian Honeyburn removes all of the skeletal remains from the museum displays and storage. He has the bones cremated.
Detective Honeyburn is a local and grows up knowing about this case. He has 2 daughters of his own, so he feels the importance of protecting these children's remains.
With a ceremony on English Bay with the police chaplain, the cremated remains of the Babes in the Woods are scattered to the ocean wind. But not before small samples are kept for DNA testing.
With the advent of DNA profiling and using PCR tests, police know they only need a few viable cells to collect good DNA samples. This is a revolution in forensic science.
Detective Honeyburn, as part of the British Columbia Unsolved Homicide Unit, sends a tooth from each skeleton to the University of British Columbia's forensic dentistry experts.
Teeth are the last parts of the human body to decompose, which means it's more likely to extract viable DNA from them. And in Vancouver, here's one of the world's foremost experts in extracting DNA from teeth, which is needed because the remains are now 50 years old.
The teeth are decontaminated, frozen, then ground into a fine powder. The powder is then treated with chemicals to expose cells, and DNA is extracted from those cells.
When the results return, they shatter over 40 years of assumptions in the case.
The Babes in the Woods are both boys.
For those 45 years, leads from witnesses in 1953 who had suspicions about 2 boys in Stanley Park have been disregarded. Instead, every story involving a boy and a girl was investigated. DNA evidence proving they are both male changes everything. The original assumption was a crucial error.
Tipsters calling in with information regarding the 2 missing boys may have been ignored completely. The truth is lost to the ages.
In 1997, all detectives can do is review the files to see if there are any accounts involving 2 boys. They hope to discover DNA that confirms or eliminates the lead.
What police do know is that the boys shared a mother, but had different fathers. They know the hatchet is the murder weapon, but they don't know when the murder would have taken place. Looking back at the files, Detective Honeyburn and his unit realized the time estimate was based on unreliable information.
The original time estimate of 1947 is based on the availability of a child's shoe, which turned out to be false. Also, by the size of the tree root growth and leaves on top of the shallow grave. A botanist was never brought in to examine the site. The assumption that the crime may have taken place years later seems hasty.
Detectives scour through files, eliminating old leads and reinvestigating new ones. A sailor reports that he saw a woman jump out of the woods in May 1944. She had 1 shoe and no coat, made a guttural sound, and ran off. But one report seems most promising to Detective Honeyburn. 2 brothers disappear from a rooming house near the city's Skid Row.
Skid Rows are considered a place in the city where the poorest of the poor live. The Skid Row in Vancouver was one of the original logging trails.
Awareness is changing towards the needs of poor people and the social supports they need. In the mid-20th century, not only is there an absence in social services, it was not unusual for society to be indifferent to the plight of people in poverty.
The boys' parents claim a married couple from Manitoba adopted them, and identifying the Manitoba couple will unlock the identities of the babes in the woods.
In 1998, Detective Honeyburn is very confident that he will soon identify the babes in the woods, so he speaks to the nation's media about it, announcing that the case will soon be solved.
But the detective's hunch comes up empty. Once again, the babes in the woods case goes cold.
By the start of a new century, investigators know less than what they thought they knew in 1953. At this point, things look bleak.
Decades have passed, and the answer of who killed the babes in the woods may never be solved.
At this point, detectives believe a victory would be identifying these boys by their names. After 4 decades, this brings a degree of closure.
But DNA profiling hasn't closed the case. It would take 20 more years before the 2 boys found in a shallow grave in Stanley Park could be given their names. After 4 decades as Vancouver's most notorious unsolved murder, the Babes in the Woods case is turned upside down in 1998. Police discover through forensic dental analysis that the Babes in the Woods are actually 2 boys who were murdered in the 1940s. 2 young boys who have shared a mother but have different fathers, of modest means, wearing aviator helmets, murdered with a small hatchet and left to rest in a shallow grave, discovered years later by a parks worker. Police know that bringing a killer to justice is very unlikely, but 21st century investigative technology gives them the hope that they can find out who the boys are.
Giving the boys their names back would be a moral victory and help put the case to rest.
Detectives want to close the case for the sake of generations of police investigators who have poured countless hours into finding answers that have yet to come. Tracking a family tree through genetic genealogy, finally giving each babe in the woods an identity.
With availability of DNA kits to build family trees, law enforcement sees an opportunity to use genetic genealogy for criminal investigations. Genetic genealogy can find the relatives of a criminal, partial chromosomal matches, which can lead to a full DNA match.
The first example of genetic genealogy being used to solve a murder is the Golden State Killer case in California.
Joseph James DeAngelo Jr., the Golden State Killer, known by many other names, such as the original Night Stalker, is one of California's most notorious serial killer rapists.
He is a former police officer, dangerous, and widely known for stalking and taunting his victims and law enforcement. He's been able to get away with at least 50 rapes, 13 murders, and 120 burglaries. But his trail goes cold over 3 decades.
But advances in technology eventually turn the tide against him. In a radical move, investigators upload the killer's DNA profile to a public genealogy site. California law enforcement links DNA from a rape kit to a close relative
And locate a 4th cousin of the killer. From there, they create a family tree and narrow down their search to find DeAngelo.
DeAngelo is arrested, and finally in June 2020, pleads guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and 13 counts of kidnapping in a deal to avoid the death penalty. He receives multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole.
Before DNA technology came along, you needed a smoking gun, a fingerprint, or an eyewitness. Now you can connect those dots on a molecular level using genetic genealogy. It gives police a lot of hope that they can now name the babes in the woods.
Police team up with a firm in Massachusetts that specializes in forensic genetic genealogy, where they link incomplete DNA strands to family trees. This firm, Redgrave Research Forensic Services, had helped solve the murder of 9-year-old Christine Jessup, a well-known cold case in Canada.
Vancouver police used bone fragments to extract DNA from the older boy and send it to the lab for sequencing. The firm then uploads the DNA to the databases. Then the search begins.
Redgrave uploads the DNA to sites like GEDmatch, a public genetic genealogy database, and Family Tree DNA, a genetic testing company, where they can potentially compare the DNA extracted from the bone fragment with DNA profiles of living relatives.
With thousands of people voluntarily undergoing DNA testing in order to research their family trees, more profiles are available to investigators than ever before.
Meanwhile, elsewhere in Vancouver, a young woman also hopes advances in genetic genealogy will solve the mystery of her missing family members. While flipping through a family album, 26-year-old Allie Brady discovers pictures of 2 young boys. One has blonde hair and blue eyes, the other has darker features. When the young woman asks her grandmother, Diane, who the boys are, Diane says they are her long-lost brothers.
For some people, when you hear about your long-lost relatives, you want to know more, but Diane is evasive.
When family members ask Diane about what happened to her brothers, she gets teary-eyed and says it's in the past. She doesn't want to talk about it.
Clearly, to Allie, something terrible happened to Diane's brothers. Allie's grandmother refuses to give any details, but the family hopes that DNA ancestry may give them clues about their missing relatives. Hoping to find a connection to her great-uncles, Allie Brady and her mother collect a DNA sample from the saliva of Diane.
Ancestry databases like this are great for finding long-lost relatives. But in this case, the results are disappointing.
But in 2020, Allie Brady reaches out to a local podcaster who has covered the Babes in the Woods case. Allie tells the podcaster her story. With true crime podcasts becoming increasingly popular in the years leading up to 2020, investigative podcasters have been bringing long-gone cold cases back into public discussion. While at times they can be sensational or insensitive to victims and their families, they also can be an enormous help. The growing true crime curiosity has inspired their audiences to take action, give tips, or investigate their personal stories. In some cases, this can even break cases wide open, and might solve what many think is an unsolvable case.
The True Crime Podcaster connects Vancouver police with Allie Brady, and this ultimately provides investigators with a confirming piece of genetic evidence.
Police use a special database called GEDmatch, which does not automatically include the DNA samples from major ancestry services in order to protect privacy of its users. People have to opt in to allow law enforcement to use their DNA samples on GEDmatch.
Once Allie Brady gives police permission to acquire the DNA sample, They send it to the lab for analysis and comparison to the skulls. The lab results come back. It's a match.
After so many years, there is finally a piece of indisputable evidence confirmed by 2 DNA samples. Finally, police have the answer.
After 7 decades, the babes in the woods have been identified. The remains of 2 young boys are found in Stanley Park. The Babes in the Woods case becomes Vancouver's most notorious unsolved murder, with the skulls of the boys left on display at a police museum and their bones filed away in cardboard boxes. DNA analysis done in the 90s sheds new light on the case, but doesn't go far enough to give the boys a name. But in 2021, police submit DNA samples to a forensic genealogy firm, hoping to find living relatives. At the same time, Allie Brady and her family connect with police. They believe they are the relatives of the missing boys.
Allie Brady's DNA sample from her grandmother confirms the work of the forensic genealogists. The babes in the woods have finally been identified.
The babes in the woods are Derek and David Dalton. Derek and David are half-brothers, sharing a mother but with different fathers. They attend elementary school in Kitsilano. Their mother, Eileen Dalton, is listed as a widow in 1941.
In the 1940s, Eileen went from place to place. She works in a coffee shop for a time and lives with various family members. But when the murders take place, there is no record of Eileen's whereabouts until she appears on the front page of the Vancouver Daily Province.
In an unusual twist, Eileen Dalton and her twin sister, Doreen Taylor, post their pictures and shared address in some kind of match game, which puts her on the front page of the newspaper in 1949.
From this we know, Eileen lived with her sister and Eileen's oldest daughter, Diane.
Diane would tell Allie stories of how they'd have to jump out of windows of places they were renting in Vancouver to avoid paying rent that they couldn't afford. Diane would later tell her granddaughter, Allie, that the boys were taken away by social services while she stayed with her mother. Although this story has been passed down in the family, Vancouver detectives were not able to verify whether Derek and David had been taken by social services, as they could find no trace of records to indicate this. It is still uncertain who had custody of the boys at the time of the murder. In the 1950s, Eileen changes her family name to Bousquet. An innocent question from a granddaughter about pictures in a photo album unlocks a chain of events that solves the 70-year mystery.
For Allie Brady, it's confirmation of her long-standing suspicions. Derek and David Dalton, her great-uncles, are the babes in the woods.
Today, I'm pleased to announce that the Vancouver Police Department has positively identified the 2 young victims as David and Derek Dalton. The murders of David and Derek have haunted generations of homicide investigators. It brings me great satisfaction to be able to stand here today to give these children, finally, after this many years, a name, and to bring some closure to this horrific crime. Last week, members of the investigative team had an opportunity to meet with distant relatives of Derek and David and to inform them of our investigative findings. The family members have decided not to be here today, and we want to respect their privacy by not providing personal details on them.
As Vancouver police make the announcement, they state that the person who killed Derek and David was likely a close relative who died approximately 25 years ago. They theorize the boy's mother is the likely suspect. This makes little sense to the family. They had thought of her as a gentle person who babysat children often. The fur coat, which was used by the killer to cover Derek and David's remains, seems to support the belief that Eileen did not kill her young sons.
In fact, the evidence no longer suggests that Eileen Dalton is the killer. The fur coat the boys are wrapped up in is size 16. Eileen is 5'1", and being petite her entire life, she is closer to a size 2. This case is now 70 years old, and investigators are reasonably certain that whoever killed these boys is no longer alive.
For the family of Derek and David, knowing what happened to them does bring a modicum of closure. But questions remain, questions that may never be answered.
Police now know that it's Derek and David Dalton who were found in Stanley Park in 1953. However, they may never know why the boys were killed or who did it.
The killer may never officially be known, but in the end, it's not about vengeance or retribution. It's about providing dignity to the two boys. Given the variables and length of the case and the fragility of the evidence, the fact that the boys now have names is substantial. Generations later, police are stepping up to find resolution with tools and processes once never imagined. These completely old and cold cases are given new life.
There's a sense of relief to finally bring justice and closure to the families of the victims. Unfortunately, many of them did not live to see it, but it's important for those who did. The truth is that this case was almost unsolved. If it wasn't for the hard work and perseverance of the many investigators, it might still be.